Hello and welcome to this brief video in which we're going to be looking into the world of vehicle emissions testing. A lot has been happening in this sector in recent years, and so this video will focus specifically on the role of portable emissions measurement systems in the real-world driving emissions testing field. And to that end, I'm delighted to say that I have with me James Hobday, who's a director of the company Emissions Analytics, who specialise in this field. So thank you for joining me, James. I wonder if you could kick off by perhaps explaining what PEMS testing is.
Absolutely, thank you. So PEMS testing is essentially where we take laboratory accurate technology and measurements systems and we deploy them in the real world. So the laboratory has a lot of advantages, but the laboratory does struggle to actually replicate what is happening in real world conditions. So for quite some time now, cars, trucks, and off-highway machinery has been tested in the real world to give another layer of confidence, but also another perspective as to how these machines are operating. So in terms of the measurements, we're looking at key pollutants being NOx, particulates, CO, CO2. But as a company, we have capabilities to look at a wider spectrum. VOCs and also pollutants like N2O that are particularly concerning from a climate change point of view.
Thank you. And in the introduction, I said that a lot has been happening in the world of real world emissions testing. Perhaps you could summarise what's happened perhaps in the last few years for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of it's driven by legislation. So there's been a regulatory need growing within Europe, but also globally, to make sure that vehicles and machines are compliant in the lab, but they're also compliant in the real world, because there is often a difference between the two. And as I say, it's difficult to replicate the real world in the lab, and equally, there's some aspects of lab testing that would be difficult in the real world. So, for example, there's a requirement called Stage V service monitoring, which is exactly that. It is monitoring. So, for example, we would go on behalf of an engine manufacturer, we would go to a construction site and we would install our PEMS equipment. So it's going to take real-time measurements from the exhaust, and then the machine would operate as it would normally do. It would complete exactly the same tasks. It wouldn't be encumbered in any way. And we take measurements throughout that test, and then that test data is then submitted to the European Commission so they can get a sense as to what's going on. Now, at the moment, that test is not a pass or fail because there is such a variety in off-highway machines and also how they operate. The ambient conditions can be impactful. If you think if you're digging soil which is quite loose, that will be easier than soil that's very firm, so that would have an impact. So these things are being ironed out, but in other instances there is a pass or fail. So the trucks on our roads in Europe, there is a requirement called service conformity, and that is absolutely a pass or fail. So there's regulatory pressure, but then there's also just the need and demand from the manufacturers themselves. They want this other layer of certainty and understanding as to how their machines, engines, technologies, their renewable fuels, how do they perform in the real world? And these are, some of the most prominent companies and, household names. The reason that we get involved is essentially that going out into the field, using this equipment, which is costly equipment. I guess the manufacturers of the equipment would probably describe it as being reassuringly expensive, in that it is very precise. It is very good at what it does, but there's a considerable amount of resource. So rather than having an expensive analyzer maybe sitting on the shelf for a lot of the time, they outsource it to emissions analytics because we do this as a business. So this is something we do every day, so we could do it in a cost-effective fashion. But also, crucially, let's be honest, we all like to see results that are from the third party, from an independent party where there isn't the opportunity for bias. So quite often we're involved because we can bring a neutral perspective to give them that understanding and that security that things are as they hope them to be.
So you're producing robust, defensible data for your clients, and is that purely with the goal of regulatory compliance, or are there other drivers for the testing requirements?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the regulations, I guess, is the big push, but also from an R&D point of view. So, and we work with kind of a surprising range of technologies, I think. There's a really novel, interesting technology coming out of New York. There's a company called Amogy. So Amogy are taking ammonia, they crack the ammonia to produce hydrogen. The hydrogen, as part of this reaction, generates energy that powers a vessel and also off-highway machinery. So they're still in prototype phase, in R&D phase, and I can talk about it because they kindly gave us a very generous testimonial. But we're part of that process. So we can help them in that process, but equally at the end, when it comes to being a finished machine or product or fuel, we can provide proof of concept. So that's helpful from an R&D point of view, but also it might be helpful from a marketing point of view. If anyone has been to London and visited the Thames, you'd see it was known as the Clipper. There's a vessel called the Thames by Uber. So this vessel had an old and, let's say, relatively dirty diesel engine powering it. So they retrofitted it with what's, I guess you could almost call it a plug-in hybrid. So a big battery pack, so that when it's running through London, it was zero emissions, but then outside of that, less so. It's relying back on the engine again. But essentially, we were brought in to benchmark the old diesel versus the new and improved vessel, so that they could share without it coming across as being a greenwash, independent, verified data to say, look, this is what it was and this is what it is now. And that can be very helpful. It can be very powerful.
So when I think of real world emissions testing, I think of driving cars, but you're talking about other types of vehicles as well. Does this mean that real world emissions applies to all manner of different combustion process driven vehicles?
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing a need from a greater array of vehicles. So we still test cars today. So we have a project coming up in Singapore, for example, where we'll be testing a lot of cars in real world conditions, because essentially in Singapore, you have a lot of traffic. So if they took, let's say, the certified real driving emissions data, that would not be representative of driving in Singapore. So we're testing a range of cars, but also buses and commercial vehicles in Singapore. So really, if it's got an exhaust, there's a fair chance that we've come near to testing it. So this includes trains as well. It really depends on depends on the industry and the drivers, but there's more of it going on because, again, organizations, government bodies, technology providers, they're all looking for that layer of certainty that things are as they should be in the real world. And to do that, you need to test. And quite often the most effective, cost-effective, and sort of robust way of doing it is to outsource it. And we're very pleased to be a company that's often asked to help.
So what are the main challenges for real world emissions testing that your company is able to solve?
The first thing is obviously getting there. So we work where our clients are. So right now, my colleagues are, a couple of them are in Mexico. And it's been a challenge to get there. But these are challenges that we can work around, and essentially our business is built to solve.
Sorry, do you mean getting the equipment there?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Oh,
getting the equipment there. No, the flights were okay for the start. It's getting the equipment there. So that can be challenging. And I think for a lot of organizations, when they think about doing it in-house, it can just become a disproportionate drain. I think just kind of at a philosophical point in that when you're an organization that manufactures engines, machines, vessels, technologies, and you have really fantastic engineers, very smart people. You ideally want those people looking forward. What are we going to do next? And inherently, what we're doing when we test is actually we're looking backwards. We're looking at what has been done before. So keeping that resource forward facing makes a lot of sense for companies so that when it comes to arranging these tests in the field, they can outsource that. Somebody else takes care of the shipping aspects, getting to the site, working with the customers, because we can dedicate our focus to it. You know, one of the most important parts of this is that quite often you're working with the operator and they've got a job to do. They've got a business to run. And we really bend over backwards to make sure that when we're working with them, we are genuinely working with them. So we are working around them. We're not asking them to change what they do. And for example, that means that we set our equipment outside of their working hours. It means that we arrive first thing in the morning so that our equipment is warming up so that it is ready to go when the shift begins. So I think it's a big part of it. And of course, an organization doing these things with, it might not be possible for them.
Sure. So, looking forward then, and this is my final question, what changes do you foresee in the real world emissions testing sector over the next few years?
I think it will continue to develop in scale and importance. I think you'll see a greater number of countries taking it on as a regulatory requirement. So I think that will certainly come. And I think that when we're looking to decarbonize and we're looking to reduce emissions, that there's so much being said that sometimes it's hard to define the signal and to see the wood for the trees and okay, well, what is the truth of the matter? Because there's so many different ambitions and policy and just I suppose bias from those companies, so that having organizations that can come and to test and see, okay, what is the reality and can define the reality of the situation independently, I think that becomes increasingly important.
So essentially, you're enabling clients to make data-driven decisions.
Yes, exactly that. Where we don't provide engineering services, so we provide testing services. So whether the result is good, bad, indifferent, doesn't make any difference to us because there's no knock-on effect. We don't have a stake in it. Our only focus is to deliver a robust test.
Sure. Okay, that's great. Thanks very much for your time, James.
Thanks, Graham.